Hello, welcome to Love Ripple. I'm Eric Newport, and today I'm grateful to be joined by Mr. John Kiper. Mr. Kiper is a New Hampshire native, a small business owner, a father, an artist, and more, and is now a candidate for governor of the state of New Hampshire. John is running in the Democratic Party, whose primary is held on September 10th, with the general election following on November 5th. Please visit vote.gov/register/NH to register to vote or to learn more. Thank you, John. Appreciate you being here.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate you taking the time, to talk. I just want to have an opportunity to learn more about your campaign and for you to be able to speak to the voters of New Hampshire as well. So to begin with, I was just wanted to ask, what motivated your run for governor and why you're currently running for governor here in New Hampshire?
Sure. So believe it or not, but I was on the Secretary of State's website in 2015. I don't really remember what I was looking for, but I happened to stumble upon the qualification to be governor. And I realized at that point I was qualified, meaning that I lived in the state for 7 years, I was a registered voter, and I was over the age of 30. And it always kind of just lingered in the back of my head that I was qualified to vote, or to run.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2022, no one primaried Tom Sherman, who ran as a Democrat.
Yep.
And he lost. And I remember just kind of thinking, it seems silly that that only one person would run, and there should be a primary. Primaries are generally good because they make the candidate stronger, you come up with good arguments.
Yeah.
So I thought, maybe I'll run in 2024. And then when Sununu said he wasn't running again, I thought, man, I think I'm going to go for it. Because another thing that's interesting is that it's only $100 to get on the ballot.
Nice.
So it's really not that expensive.
Yeah.
And the thing that I have learned about New Hampshire and that I knew going into it was that we are in a small state, 1.4 million roughly, and basically the whole population is around the seacoast and around the I-93 corridor from Concord, Manchester, Nashua. So you can go to all the population centers in a very short amount of time, in a day, and it's just not a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I also had basically a long list of grievances with the state of New Hampshire, and I was thinking about moving to Maine because I couldn't afford to buy a house in New Hampshire.
Yep.
And I own my restaurant, and it's getting more and more expensive to live here. And I thought, before I'm pushed out of the state of New Hampshire by rich people who are gentrifying the state from out of state, maybe I will run for governor, I will air my grievances and make sure that everyone knows everything that I think is wrong with this state.
Yep.
And whether or not it gets addressed or whatever happens, I just was like, I want to get this message out there about all these things that are wrong with the state of New Hampshire, such as the regressive way that we collect taxes for education, in which the poorest towns in our state pay the highest levels of money towards public education, and many rich communities in our state pay nothing for public education.
Yeah.
And then, there's a whole host of things. Another big motivator for me running for governor, as opposed to running for state rep or senate, was because the state reps and senators in New Hampshire are only paid $100 a year.
Yeah.
As a result, 80% of the legislature is rich or retired, and New Hampshire is the only state in the entire country that does not pay its reps.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the fundamental flaw in the New Hampshire system, and it's why we don't have enough housing, it's why the opioid crisis has gone on and on and on, and it's why I think a lot of our issues are there, because working class people simply aren't represented in Concord.
Yeah.
And that's been a big part of my message has been, if working class people and young people want to get change, want change to actually happen, we need to vote someone who is one of us, who has got the same problems as us.
Absolutely, I totally understand, and it does seem like a great opportunity. Chris Sununu's been the governor for the last 8 years, and it's been a Republican-held Congress for a few years as well, or many years. I'm not personally sure, but So
a number of cycles,
So since he's no longer running, it's an opportunity for different views to be showcased in Concord. So you mentioned a few things I obviously want to dive into in terms of what you think are the most pressing issues facing residents of New Hampshire these days. So I know you mentioned, I guess we can begin with housing.
Yeah.
As a young person, I'm all too familiar, and even beside being a young person, many people in New Hampshire are all too familiar with low vacancy rates and high costs. So I want to see if you can speak more on what you do as governor to help alleviate that situation.
Yeah, so housing, I think, is definitely the number one issue in New Hampshire, as well as much of the state, and in fact, much of the world.
Yeah.
So my plan is that there's a number of things we need to do. Number one, we need to really educate our planning and zoning boards as to why we need more housing. Because the fact is, the reason we do not have enough housing is because the free market is not able to function. And when the free market is not able to function in terms of housing, because we limit the supply, because everyone in a community can object to a building going up, an apartment, what ends up happening is the only way to fix the sort of ripples that happen in the economy is more government intervention. So it's like, all right, we don't have enough affordable housing, so now we got to put more money into New Hampshire housing authorities to build more affordable housing, and then we need more food stamps, and we need more all these different things because people's rent and mortgage just keep going up and up and up, and that's just what happens. It's very simple supply and demand. It really doesn't get more basic. Homeless people are only homeless because there are not enough houses. There's a very small percentage of people that are homeless who sort of reject housing and want to live in tents and whatever, but that is such a small number. It's not a majority. So my solution to the housing problem is first, it's multifaceted in the sense that what we do in Manchester and what we do in Newmarket are going to be different. The approach is going to be different. But basically, some easy things to think about are, I would like to see tiny house villages adopted as statewide in the same way that we have mobile homes. Little fun fact, you cannot put a tiny home in a mobile home park based on the rules of the mobile homes. But I think that that's wrong. And I think a lot of people who maybe don't like the idea of living in a mobile home park do like the idea of living in a tiny home. They're just generally built a little bit better, and they, I think, would appreciate value as opposed to depreciating the way mobile homes do. Mobile homes are also, I think, a good solution to the problem. Another thing that I want to do is legalize cannabis and sell it similarly to the way that we sell alcohol in the state of New Hampshire, and use the revenue and the taxes generated from that to build more affordable housing, partially through the New Hampshire Housing Authority, but also I'd like to put money into a loan fund that would basically guarantee loans for developers that want to build starter homes. So we're talking 1,200 square foot, smallish homes on a smaller footprint and on maybe a quarter of an acre lot. Because it's not just, because we have this problem where, we have things like the Housing Authority, New Hampshire Housing Authority, that will build housing for low-income folks. And they'll also help down payments. But what we don't have is any way to build starter homes and the things that really young people need to start families. And also, we need smaller homes for baby boomers to get out of their huge houses that they don't really need anymore, but they're sort of stuck there because their interest rate is either non-existent or very low. And so they're sort of trapped in their homes, and they don't see anything on the market that they could move into. So I'm trying to figure out how we could build what they call the missing middle. So the middle of the housing market, not the lower, not the higher in terms of cost. How do we build that and ensure that it goes to people in New Hampshire? I'm still kind of figuring out the legalities there of how we could have housing and provide it specifically to people that are New Hampshire residents currently. But it can definitely be done. It's just a matter of being careful with how you write the rules. Another cool thing that I'd like to see is vocational schools in New Hampshire, which already exist, building tiny homes for homeless veterans and basically anyone that's homeless. They're already doing this in other places. Maine's got a program. A bunch of other places have already started doing this. And so I think that would be a big solution, a really cool way to get homeless people off the streets. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is really to realize that the reason we don't have enough housing is because of this sort of Byzantine maze of planning and zoning laws. And it takes so long to build, and is so cost prohibitive because of just the amount of paperwork, frankly, that you have to do. And the number of people that can show up and install a project. There was an apartment building in Portsmouth that was going in. It was a lot of units. And one of the neighbors was a lawyer. He didn't want this building going in, so he fought it for a decade. And they bought it on every potential grounds, environmental reasons, all these sorts of things. And then at the end of the day, it got passed. The lawyer said, look, we're out of ways to fight this. Now, maybe these apartments would have been affordable 10 years ago. But now the developer has to pay not only the legal costs for a decade, but he has to make up for all the property taxes that he paid for 10 years when no one was living there. So we've created this system where, frankly, those of us in the apartment class, because I own this building, but I live in a 740 square foot apartment upstairs, it's important to know. we are sort of, those in the apartment class are living at the tyranny of homeowners. Because homeowners generally make up planning and zoning boards. They also are 95% of the legislature, whereas in reality, only 30% of the state is renters.
Interesting.
So we are disproportionately represented on all of these ways in which housing is created.
Sure.
And it's really easy for a homeowner to say, oh, we don't want any more apartments, and we don't want any more houses because we don't want our house prices to go down. That's not why planning and zoning laws were made. It was not for you to protect your asset. And for decades and decades and decades, homes appreciated 3% a year. That was generally the rate of return. But suddenly it's crazy how much houses are going up, and as a result, you have all these, what I'm going to call vulture capitalists coming in, and these companies coming in trying to buy up and make money off of the housing. And the way to get them out of it, I mean, I think one is to regulate it, but also to make it so that it's less profitable to be in the homeowner business because we have more supply.
Yeah, definitely. But it sounds like also make it more profitable for developers who are interested in helping build smaller or starter homes for new homeowners. So you're talking address homelessness and people without homes by creating some state-funded housing and better funding the New Hampshire Housing Authority, but also incentivizing developers by who are committed to creating a larger volume of starter homes.
And honestly, that might not even be possible. We might find out that, hey, even with incentives, there are no developers that want to build starter homes. And in that case, what I would propose is we may need to create something like the New Hampshire, because we have the New Hampshire affordable housing, that's sort of taken care of by the New Hampshire Housing Authority, but maybe either give one of these other agencies like the New Hampshire Housing Authority also tasked with how do we incentivize the missing middle, and what can we do if, do we even have to create like a government agency that builds these houses? I don't know. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. And I said to one of my friends, I said, the state could be building tiny homes. There's no reason why we couldn't be. And my buddy was like, oh, I don't know. It sounds like kind of crazy having the state, build and sell tiny homes. And I go, well, if the state of New Hampshire can sell liquor, why can't we sell houses? Because one idea that I had that I thought would be cool is, so the way the solar panel companies work right now is a lot of times they'll knock on your door and they'll go, hey, we could put some solar panels in your house. We got it all set up. You don't have to pay any money. We'll do all the paperwork and we'll put them up there, and you'll save $100 a month, and in 20 years you'll own them. I think we could do a similar thing with tiny homes, where you could knock on someone's door and say, hey, you guys got an acre out back. We could put a tiny home in there. You who are retired could move into this tiny home. It's 1,000 square feet, and you could rent out your house, and we'll help you with the paperwork. We'll help you figure out all the legalities. And then you move in there, you rent out your house. Now we've just doubled the housing in that area. So I think there's a lot of solutions, but we have to be willing to get creative. And this is the problem with the people I'm running against. Republicans and Democrats, all of the people I'm running against for governor are lobbyists, lawyer, career politician types. And their problem is they just are not creative thinkers. And they can't, when the system is the problem, and if you're like a black and white lawyer or a lobbyist, you see the system as how you create a solution or how you find a solution. But if the system itself is broken to a point where it is creating the problems, it's really hard to think outside the box and come up with ideas that are not going to be standard. And this is a criticism of Joyce Craig, one of my opponents. She was the mayor of Manchester for a number of years, and basically the housing folks that are helping me now, who helped her get elected, said when presented with different types of ideas, such as tiny homes, pods, state-sanctioned camping, she was just never willing to experiment.
It's definitely really interesting. I think you're speaking to the experience of a lot of people in New Hampshire who are not homeowners yet, or are perhaps new homeowners but still struggling financially because of the state of the market. So all these ideas offer a level of hope, of breathing room, of people financially, and that would obviously grow the economy generally as well if people have more disposable income other than housing to spend. So I definitely agree. Appreciate you bringing that up, and kind of, I guess there's many segues we can take from that discussion, but I'd like to go into next. You said the funding for these programs could be partially funded by the taxation from the legalization of cannabis. So I want you to just sort of expound upon that, your plans to hopefully legalize marijuana in New Hampshire.
So this is kind of funny. This idea evolved because when I first started thinking about running, I really wanted to eliminate the Liquor Commission, which, if you don't know, they run the liquor stores in New Hampshire, but they also enforce the liquor laws. And the Liquor Commission enforces a whole bunch of stupid blue laws that should not be on the books, that haven't really made any sense since 1890. For instance, you cannot have a bar or restaurant with and serve alcohol with less than 20 seats. You have to have 20 seats. And there's a whole host of rules I get into, and I thought, it's stupid. Why can't we buy liquor at the gas station like a normal state?
Yeah.
And then I was looking at the budget. I'm like, geez, the Liquor Commission brings in hundreds of millions of dollars. It has brought in millions and millions of dollars over the course of its lifetime.
Yeah.
And I also dug in and realized the Liquor Commission was created in 1933, right after Prohibition. And the idea was that it was going to somehow limit the consumption of alcohol, which is obviously a joke. But Republicans quickly realized, hey, this is a great cash cow. We get all this money, and we don't have to have an income tax or sales tax.
Yeah.
And the other funny thing about the Liquor Commission is that it's pretty much straight up socialism.
Yeah.
It's state-owned monopoly, right? And the Republicans love it. And this is the model that they wanted for cannabis, was something that was state-run. And I thought, why are we... And the funny part is, if you haven't been following the cannabis debate in New Hampshire, the Republicans have generally wanted a state-run model. The Democrats have said, no, that's wrong. The state's been locking people up for decades. Like, they shouldn't do that. We should have this other model where it's privatized. But I said, hey, if the Republicans want more socialism, let's give it to them. But let's make sure the money is not going to just lower taxes on rich people and corporations. Let's make a caveat in the law that the money has to go to housing.
Absolutely.
And there's this interesting thing where, because the money generated from the sale of cannabis is federally, it's illegal in a way.
Yeah.
What you would do is we would create this entity, an authority. So I don't know if you know this, but an authority is basically a quasi-public-private partnership that operates through sort of a blessing with the state, and the profits go back to the state, but it's completely independent.
Yeah.
So the employees are not state employees or anything like that. And so Pease Airport or Pease airport is an authority. And you have port authorities, and then you have housing authorities, and you have these different authorities. So we would create something that would be like the New Hampshire Cannabis Housing Authority. That would take the money from cannabis and put it directly to housing, so that we had that didn't even have to go on the books in New Hampshire. You know what I mean? But it also means that the state couldn't blow it on stupid stuff. It would go directly into various housing programs.
So it'd be structured from the get-go.
Just on housing. And if maybe in 10 years housing's not an issue anymore, then we'd restructure it and focus the money wherever is the best place. Now, the thing to remember is, it's not going to be $1 million, or not going to be $1 billion. It's going to be like $100 million, right? Which is a good chunk of money with housing, because with housing you can do stuff like you can use it as loan guarantees, or you can just loan it out and then you're making money back because of the interest. Whereas if you did it for education or for these other things, it's just going to go, well, first of all, $100 million for education is nothing. The Manchester school system has got a budget of almost $300 million itself. So it would be a drop in the bucket.
Gotcha.
But with housing, it could be sort of multiplied out in different ways. And then the other cool thing is that one of the reasons that people's property taxes and education costs are going up is because of the lack of housing. Everything sort of falls back to housing. So that's kind of where I came up with that plan. And it was really funny because and then the other thing I would do is, besides just having the state sell it at the liquor store properties, I would allow all of the current medicinal dispensaries to be able to sell recreationally.
Gotcha.
And currently they're operated as nonprofits. I didn't know this, so they would be able to operate as for-profits. But the other thing that the Republicans did not want is they just did not want a million pot shops.
Sure.
So my thought was, just to start, we have it at the liquor stores, and then we have it at let the current medicinal shops, which there's not a lot, convert into recreational. And then the other thing I would do is have a license if you wanted to, I would call it like a farmer's market license. Where if you're going to grow, let's say 25 plants or some low number, you can do that. You can sell it to your friends. You can sell it, at a farmer's market. Because I think you should be able to home grow. And then basically, if you're going to sell a shipping container's worth, it goes through the state.
Yes.
And mainly the reason I like that is because we've got thousands of people every summer that go to the liquor store from Massachusetts, and then they go up north to go to their vacation, to go on vacation.
Yeah.
And they buy a bunch of liquor. So I guarantee you, if you could buy liquor and pot in the same vicinity,
Yeah.
and if it was slightly cheaper than Massachusetts, we could be getting all that revenue.
Absolutely.
So even if the only state-run cannabis shops in New Hampshire were just the ones on 95 and 93 when you're driving up, that's all we'd need. It'd be like $100 million.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my thought line is always, when I'm thinking about taxation, is how can we get people from Massachusetts to pay for the things people in New Hampshire need? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is actually, New Hampshire's got a long history of this. I mean, the rooms and meals tax exists, which is, on food at restaurants and at hotels, because when they created it, most of the people that ate out were from out of state.
Yeah.
People from New Hampshire weren't really eating out a lot.
Yeah.
So I just think it's kind of a clever way of trying to get as much revenue from out of state as possible.
Definitely, absolutely. And I think obviously public opinion is in your favor.
Yeah.
Especially when New Hampshire is surrounded on every angle by legal marijuana. I think that people of New Hampshire feel that there's just a missed opportunity.
Totally.
Maine, Canada, Vermont, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's inevitably going to happen. And I mean, the one thing, that's why putting the money towards housing is really important. Because people that are on the fence about cannabis and don't really care either way, when you say, hey, but what if it could help get homeless people off the streets and help people afford, bring the rent down? Then they're like, oh, why not? We're going to need money for this, and there's really no one else that's running for government that's presenting any viable ways to get money for housing aside from me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, great. Thank you for sort of touching on that and explaining it, and it makes me think of something I wanted to sort of move on to, which is that in terms of kind of on the subject of taxation, you mentioned earlier that the way that the education system in New Hampshire is set up, it's a regressive model that I was hoping you could describe it again. That sounds like the burden of education falls on local municipalities, and therefore lower income communities face a larger burden.
Yeah.
So could you describe what you do to sort of improve the education system in New Hampshire?
So 70% of the local school budget is funded by the local community, which as a result of that, towns like Newmarket end up paying, and because our school was built at a time when there was no help from the state or the feds to build the school, end up paying disproportionately more, and there's some very rich towns that pay very little.
Yeah.
And so the idea is we really have to think about education in a statewide way. And they had a big commission that studied this, because basically since literally 1991, the states have been, or the towns have been saying, hey, this isn't fair, it's regressive. And they finally had another court case after a couple others where the judge said, yes, this is not legal, it's unconstitutional the way that it's being allocated, because basically taxes are supposed to be uniform across the state.
Yeah.
So the judge said right now the state gives $4,000 per student. They need to close to double that to almost $8,000. That is not really the amount of money that it costs to educate a kid. It's more like 15 to 20 grand. Now, coming up with the exact number is a little bit tricky and depends on who you ask. And obviously, some costs are higher in, let's say, Portsmouth than they would be in the North Country. So there is some discrepancies there, which I think need to be accounted for. But the issue is not that we need more funding for education. In fact, New Hampshire is in the top 10 for per pupil spending on education. It's just that there are some very poor towns that do not have enough money. And so there was a big commission that the Democrats instituted several years ago to study this. And the commission said every possible form of way you could fund it. And the takeaway was pretty simple. We need a statewide property tax, a statewide income tax, or statewide sales tax.
Yeah.
So they implement a statewide statewide property tax. And what happened was, it meant that some towns were sort of paying in and some towns were receiving. And the towns that were paying in complained about it and said, hey, we're paying for these other poorer towns. So then they ended up basically saying, all right, you can keep the statewide property tax, which makes no sense. So they collect the statewide property tax, and then some of the towns, because they don't need the money, use it to make their tax bills even lower. So they contribute very little to public education.
Yeah.
So my idea is that to make up for this money is we would take the state has about a dozen or more ways of getting revenue right now. You got business profit tax, business enterprise tax, rooms and meals tax. You've got, even just to file a business is $150 a year. You got liquor store, you got lottery, you've got all these different sources of revenue.
Yeah.
I think, and again, this depends on exactly what number you choose as being an adequate education.
Yeah.
We've been fighting about this again for decades. I think that you could raise all of those numbers, all of those revenue sources by the same amount. You know what I mean? So there's not winners or losers.
Yeah.
And there's not even really like a lot of debates. It's not like one person saying, "Oh, well, mine's going up." It'd be the same proportionality.
Yeah.
So you pay a little bit more at rooms and meals tax. You pay a little bit more at the liquor store. Lottery would be slightly more. You'd have all these little taxes go up.
Yeah.
A little bit. Instead of $150 to register a business, now it's $160. It's a couple bucks more to register a car. Like everything would go up, but
marginally.
But marginally, and the property taxes would go down. That I think is the fairest way to do it, and the way that would pass the current Senate in the most. Because the reality is, we have to come up with ideas that would actually pass a potentially Republican-leaning Senate.
Sure.
So that's where it's really important that people understand that there's a million different ways we could do this, but there's only a few that can actually get through the legislature, and that's what is so crucial.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's interesting that you talk about the balance of being a governor and sort of the authority that you do have, but also having to balance that with a legislature, and that not possibly being aligned with your party or your views. So I want to just kind of remind again that you mentioned that the New Hampshire legislature only pays, is it representatives and senators?
Yes.
So the entire New Hampshire Congress is only paid $100 a year
plus 50 cents a mile for driving. Yeah.
So, like you said, it leads to a situation where the Congress, which is a large body of people, is being very disproportionately controlled by people who have the means to do this. And if it's a full-time job and you're only earning $100 a year, that excludes the vast majority of everybody to be contenders. So you also think it would be a good idea to implement wages or salaries for payment, compensation of some decent form for Congress, because that could also open the door for an entire new generation of people to get into that line of work.
Exactly.
And therefore, also, as we move forward, if you get elected and decide to continue being governor, then there is greater opportunity for growth as the years go by as well.
Yeah. And this would benefit Republicans and Democrats, because we're both young Democrats and Republicans are getting shut out of the system equally. And it's not benefiting. It's really only benefiting the elderly and the wealthy who are currently in there. Even a lot of them, I've met some Democrats, some older Democrats that are basically getting pushed into running, and they don't want to do it. And it's just a terrible system. And so my idea was that even if we just started with $500 a week while they're in session, which is only January to June, and $500 a week, it would be less than $5 million, which out of a $13 billion budget, not a lot of money. And that would allow, $500 a week, I think would be enough that, so if you're a state rep, you basically are there a couple days a week, and then you have your committee. So depending on how often your committee meets, it's 2 or 3, sometimes 4 times a week. But the tricky part is that the schedule isn't set until the Thursday of that following week. So you don't know what your next week's looks like. So you really can't work any sort of normal hours.
Sure.
And a lot of people end up not being able to show up for votes because they underestimate how much time they're going to be there, and then they use all their vacation time at the beginning. And then there's these important votes, and then people are missing votes, and we're losing. We're passing or not blocking bad bills because just physically people can't get to Concord because they have kids or they have work.
Sure.
So it's just an insane system that is so broken, and 30% of the state reps do not run for re-election every time. So you have this huge turnover, and I'm all for term limits, but this is sort of radical on the sense that there's no continuity to it. You constantly have new people up there who don't know what's been going on. And then the other interesting thing is, I learned this today, before 1983, they only met once every 2 years. So I think it was easier for people to do it. But every year that the inflation gets higher and housing costs get higher, it continues to limit the number of people that can do it. And there's some good people that stopped running that didn't run this aren't running next year. And I have to wonder if the economic equation has just gotten a lot harder for people that were maybe in the middle.
Sure.
And maybe a husband was working so the wife could run or vice versa.
Yeah.
They could live off one income, and suddenly because of the housing costs and inflation they can't. So that's, I think, and that's where if the legislature was to change and to be more reflective of the working class people, I think it would open a whole world of things that we could do. And because for years I was always wondering, I'm like, why is it that Maine, which is a very similar demographic to New Hampshire, has free school lunch, and they've got these really great recycling programs and all this stuff. And I realize it's because Maine pays their reps. And that's really the only difference. And that's what I think is probably the most important thing for people to realize. And I wish that all these groups in the state of New Hampshire that are fighting for environmental issues or LGBT rights or education funding would realize you're fighting this fight the hardest way possible. If we fought to pay the reps, and again, $4.5 million is not a huge outlay for the state of New Hampshire. And considering that with these education freedom voucher bills that Republicans passed, it's going to cost tens, 20s, hundreds of millions of dollars. The funding is there, and people need to understand that what the system we have right now is plutocracy ruled by the rich or gerontocracy ruled by the elderly, but it's fundamentally not democracy. And that is really important for people to realize. And once you realize that, it's very easy to get pissed off because it's like this system is rigged against us.
Yeah, you don't feel like you're represented, and it doesn't feel like a lot of the people who are in those positions have necessarily the as true or as familiar of intentions to address these issues head on that regular people or working class people, like you said, experience, because they're not experiencing it on the same level.
Well, this is the problem. We have state reps in this town who are they're Democrats, but they're so old that they haven't had to worry about rent for decades. They paid their house off 10 years ago. They just do not understand the problems of the working class and of the families of New Hampshire, and they just have no comprehension for what it's like to have your rent go from $1,000 to $1,600 in a year or two. And they just really don't get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think on your website, right as you go to votekiper.org, you say, New Hampshire needs a working class governor. That's your personal experience, but also something that you're hoping to expand beyond yourself to allow the people of New Hampshire to really join together and have better representation. So that's great. And thank you for sort of describing that. Just a couple more things I want to make sure I'm touching base with you here about. Firstly, I think it would be improper not to address the opioid crisis in New Hampshire. So I want you to take a few moments and perhaps describe what your knowledge and experience with that has been, and perhaps what some of the missteps that have led to the situation in New Hampshire, sort of the extent it's been regarding opioid addiction and deaths.
So it's really important to understand that the opioid addiction began because a company called Purdue Pharma targeted New Hampshire and wanted to sell a drug called Oxycontin, which they acted and they lied and said it was not habit forming. And it's really important to know that one of the people that I'm running against for governor, Cindy Wormington, was a lobbyist for Purdue Pharma, and in the early 2000s working for Purdue Pharma, went to the Senate and said, Oxycontin is not habit forming and totally safe. Okay, and she's running for governor as a Democrat. And there is if people don't help me, there's a chance she could win, and she will clearly lose the general election because there's no world in which a lobbyist for Purdue Pharma former is going to be elected governor. But it's important to know that company created the opioid crisis. They did not create addiction, but they flooded so much Oxycontin into the state that it was just inevitable. And there's actually a chart that you can find where if you look around 2015, they started really cracking down on the Oxycontin, and the Oxycontin sales goes down, and the heroin sales overdoses go up. And I lived through this. I'm 41, so the late 90s, I started seeing my friends and kids I went to high school with messing around with these drugs. I never did, luckily. And then what happened was I saw it happen because the oxys were really expensive, and then the kids switched to heroin because it was cheaper. And now a lot of those people are dead. I have so many dead kids that I graduated high school with. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. And the thing that's terrifying is that a bunch of my friends who didn't who survived the opioid crisis got into the recovery community and now work as social workers and therapists and stuff. The scary thing is that even some of these people, and there's been people that have been really active in this community, have relapsed and died. And then every time somebody dies, there's this fear that other people connected to them could relapse and die. So it sucks because in 20 plus years of this opioid crisis, we have better tools. We have Suboxone, which is a drug that helps people get off it. We have Narcan, which keeps people alive, which is obviously really important. But the struggle is not, and it's gotten, the problem has gotten a little bit better, definitely, but it still exists. And I wish I could say that there was some silver bullet that would solve it, but there really isn't. I mean, we need more funding for mental health treatment, which and is connected with drug abuse. One thing that the Republicans did during COVID that I think was a major mistake is they privatized basically the whole recovery industry, and there was some state-run facilities that are no longer in existence. And what happened is these for-profit places that allegedly help people get off opioids are frequently, not all of them, but some of them are being run by not good people who are using them as a way to milk Medicare and Medicaid for money. And they figured out that, hey, as long as people are there in the bed, they can get money. And they're not really helping anybody. So it's a complicated problem, but it's definitely not going away.
And it's all so multifaceted. I think everything that we've talked about in this conversation is tied together with each other.
Totally.
So obviously, addiction is related to homelessness and related to the economy and people's money
and mental health,
lack of, and mental health and education. So it's all integrated. So as every idea and program that has the best interests of the people in mind is inevitably often going to beneficially affect these other issues as well.
So I mean, just if people think about, if you're paying 50, 60%, 70% of your income towards rent or mortgage, you're going to be more stressed, you're going to be more anxious, you're going to be more depressed, and more prone to the addictions that would soothe you. And I mean, it's not even necessarily that addiction leads to homelessness, but when you're homeless and you're on the street, I've heard stories about people said that they started using meth just to stay up at night so that their stuff didn't get stolen. And that is just the reality of the situation. And fentanyl is a whole other beast because fentanyl by and large is obviously not being produced in the U.S. It's coming in from Mexico and stuff. And China is a big manufacturer of fentanyl. But I mean, one thing that I still blows my mind is that I have friends in Nobile that have had injuries recently, and the doctors are trying to still give them 20 or 30 Oxycontins or fentanyl, and they're like, "Whoa, I don't want anything to do with that." So I think we really need to crack down on the pharmaceutical lobby in general. I don't know if you know this, but the United States consumes 50% of the world's pharmaceuticals, and we make up less than 5% of the world's population. And if they were really that effective, we should have the best, healthiest population in the world, and the fact is we do not. And I think that for-profit health system contributes to the greed of the pharmaceutical industry, which, as I had said before, one of my opponents, Cindy Warrington, has greatly financially benefited from. They have donated to her campaign to the tunes of tens of thousands of dollars, and so they're going to control her, and there's no way she's going to be able to regulate pharmaceuticals. She is the pharmaceutical industry.
Absolutely.
So I think it's really important for that word to get out there, and for people to realize that who you elect and what they did before you elected them matters.
Absolutely, it matters because it's a pretty good indicator of what may happen if you elect that individual. So somebody's reputation and record does matter. It does matter alongside what they currently say they're going to do. So that's important to address. It's not something that I think every person in New Hampshire sees firsthand, but it's something that I think most everybody knows needs to still be addressed, and that does tie into healthcare, of course, as well, which is nationally a huge issue that a lot of people are underinsured or don't have access to healthcare. Are there any plans in New Hampshire specifically, or is there even the means to be able to help alleviate the healthcare situation?
So, I think there is a way, and this is an idea I've just been sort of tossing around. I haven't dug into super hard.
Yeah.
But I'll just spell it out for you. It's a fresh idea. It probably will evolve as do all my ideas. But one thing I was thinking about was, so Vermont looked into having some kind of state-run Medicare program.
Yep.
The problem was they just physically do not have enough people to pull it off. You need a really big pool of people. So I was thinking perhaps Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont could join and be like an insurance pool that was sort of run by the state that would just lower the cost. I mean, basically, if you could have a nonprofit insurance company, right? And then the way you would start this is, if you think about it, there's a bunch of people in all three of these states that already have government-funded insurance. In the sense that if you're a teacher, a firefighter, a police officer, you work at the town hall, you're by proxy, your insurance is paid for by the people. So we had this huge pool of people that are already basically, they're in private insurance, but we're paying for it. So why not put them in one big pool, right, to begin with? And since we're already paying for their insurance, put them in one pool, and then let people buy into that pool. And because you're taking the profit away, right, it should be cheaper. And like, I actually think that because insurance is one of these things which, a lot of times you have to have, really. And, you have to have, it, and, generally it's not something that you're like, the market doesn't really do a great job of making one insurance better than another. You're just looking at what's the baseline cost and how much I'm going to have to pay if I get, cancer or something. But what it's bad at is really solving the problem of affordable healthcare, in the sense that even people with really good insurance, somebody gets cancer or something, and it doesn't matter. They still end up bankrupt. So this is clearly a flawed system. So my idea was basically if the three states could combine and create some kind of pool, and then slowly kind of bring more people into this pool. And then ultimately, if we had, we get to a point where at least, the people making under whatever amount of money, 100,000 or something, we're all covered. I lived in Australia for a while, and they've got a really good system where they've got state-run insurance or healthcare, but then there is a private health insurance that you can buy if you want additional coverage. And yes, like there are, waiting lists for different surgeries and stuff. That's what happens. But the end of the day, to go to the doctor, it's like $25. And one thing people got to really, really think about is, as the boomers, right, and this fastest growing demographic in the state is 65 and up, which grew 50% from 2011 to 2021. As they age, right, all of these elderly people in New Hampshire, they're going to be going to the doctor more, right? And they're going to need more services, okay? Which means for us to go and see our doctor is going to be harder, and it's going to be more expensive, because they're going to be just physically taking up more time in the ER and in all these other areas of healthcare. So it's going to end up costing all of us a lot more money, because our insurance rates are going to go up, because they're going to need more care. So we're going to really need to figure this out, and it's probably, and we need to do it before the system completely collapses. So I like I said, that's one idea that I'm sort of working on. But I think it's important that we start thinking about how do we get there.
I agree, and I think in many ways as well, the healthcare system, at least in America, that we have is more of a sick care system than it is a healthcare. It's addressing concerns when they arise, as opposed to, in most cases, addressing what the root cause is that creates the disease or the issue in the first place. And I think it's, again, the interconnection of all these things. If you talk about people being less stressed, people having a little bit more money, and with more disposable income, you can live a healthier lifestyle if you choose to. You can afford healthier food, have less food insecurity. These things will lead to the development as well of a healthier society. And also lower the cost. So it's kind of, there's definitely an important interconnection there as well, but obviously, the pharmaceutical industry is notorious as well for being a for-profit juggernaut, against the people in many ways.
I mean, I think in an ideal world, I would definitely eliminate some little things, such as, we are one of the few countries that allows pharmaceuticals to be advertised, and it wasn't always the way. I remember when I was younger, you weren't allowed to advertise pharmaceuticals, because why How does it help me to see it? You know, should my doctor just be the only one that knows? Because what you end up with is people going, you get these ads for like, you know, what is the one? Restless leg syndrome. You know, and you're like, oh, well, my leg kind of feels a little restless, you know, or like, I find, you know, the drugs, some of the drugs for, you know, depression, it's like, oh, you feeling lethargic? You feeling a little tired? You feeling a little? It's like, oh yeah, I need that drug. Yeah, you know what I mean? And like, especially the ones that are like, oh, a great drug in addition to the 3 drugs you're already taking.
Yes,
you know,
right.
And it's like, it's just. I was talking to somebody, an older woman at an event the other day. She said when she switched going to cannabis, when she started using cannabis, she was able to stop taking 27 different medications for pain that she was on. You know, and I wonder how much does that have to do with the fact that cannabis is not legal.
Absolutely.
You know, when we have this really active pharmaceutical lobby infiltrating our state. You know?
Very important to note. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, it kind of segues in another way as well into sort of just a healthier society and community. Something else I wanted to hear your take on is just the state of the environment and pollution in Hampshire, and you know what your thoughts are as to improving that. If you know how big of an issue it is in New Hampshire, and what we can do to live in a healthier and more sustainable state.
Yeah, I think the first thing I propose is that the state of New Hampshire should be suing ExxonMobil and the other petroleum companies for knowingly causing greenhouse gas and global warming emissions, global warming through the greenhouse gas emissions. Because I don't know if you know this, but they knew they were warned in 1970 with their own climate scientists that this would happen. And I think it's ridiculous that we would then, taxpayers, be paying for flooding and all these other issues because of some, while the oil companies make record profits. There's already a lawsuit, class action lawsuit going through. Other cities and states and towns are suing. We should get in line for that money the same way that we sued Purdue Pharma, maker of OxyContin, for poisoning our state. So I'm a big fan of holding corporations accountable and getting money from them when they bring products into our state that are harmful. For instance, PFOAs, forever chemicals, are still coming into the state through Teflon and other chemicals, and 3M makes a lot of products that use these PFOAs that never break down. And the EPA just said that, you know, wastewater treatment plants are going to have to start pulling the PFAS out of the water stream, which is going to cost a lot of money. And frankly, we should not have to pay for that. 3M should. And the fact that these things are still being sold, you know, like, what is the point of a $20 pan from Walmart, that maybe non-stick pan, if down the line it costs us $100 to get the PFAS out of our water? It makes no sense. So I think we need to recognize the fact that corporations have been given too much power since the 80s, and with this power, they have moved. They make profit, and then we end up footing a lot of the bill. You know, so they've moved sort of like this structure where everything gets paid for by us, and they can maximize their profits. It's insane. So sue the ExxonMobil. You know, limit PFAS in the state for sure. Limit PFAS products in the state being sold for sure. And then hold the companies that bring those products in accountable. Another interesting fact, ExxonMobil is the #1 producer of single-use plastics in the world. So a huge issue for me, too, is microplastics. If you follow my TikTok, and if you don't, you should, my TikTok, my Instagram, whatever, I have put a bunch of videos up there about microplastic and the various places that they found it, which is basically everywhere in your body, including semen and your penis and like baby placentas and all of these things, and on top of Mount Everest and at the bottom of the Mariana Trench in the ocean, it's everywhere. And the long-term effects of all this microplastic building up in our bodies cannot be good. You know, the microplastic potential can be a vector for disease and illness and all these other things. And just at some point, I'm worried we're not going to be able to make babies anymore. You know. So microplastics is a huge issue. I mean, I own a restaurant, and the entire restaurant industry is built on plastic. You know, our cutting boards, by law, have to be made of plastic. So we're sitting there shopping, making microplastics. So, and I recently read this article about how when they recycle plastic, I mean, first of all, only 9% of it gets recycled. But when they do it, they have to wash the plastic because they have to get all the food and, you know, glue off it. You know, the labels. When they do that, they are releasing tons of microplastic into the environment. This was a study that was done in England, and they got they just found way more microplastics getting released into the water stream than they ever thought.
Yeah.
So I don't think recycling plastic is good at all. We
Yeah.
should stop pretending like we're doing it.
Yeah.
Another thing I'd like to do, just some minor things, or not minor, but some tweaks that could really help is we should be composting all our food. We should not be putting food in the trash with everything else.
Definitely.
Number one, it's 30 to 50% of the trash, which means that we're paying to put food in the ground with a bunch of plastic and stuff when we could be getting rid of it in a much cheaper way.
Definitely.
So we could save the cities and towns of New Hampshire millions of dollars by switching to composting.
Yeah.
Also, the compost, when it's in the in the dump or whatever, it's releasing a lot more methane.
Yeah.
If it's allowed to turn into dirt, it's much better for the environment.
Definitely.
Another couple things, we don't have enough charging stations in this state for electric cars. We should have charging stations at every liquor store in the state and every national park and every state park. And another idea I had was solar panels should just be on. We should have solar panels on every state and municipal-owned building and school in the state. I mean, that's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
I was talking to a guy from New Hampshire Clean Energy and learned that there's basically a ton of clean energy that's waiting to come up on the pipeline. And the problem is the utility companies they have to do these. I forget what it's called, but it's basically when a new solar array is being put up, they have to figure out how they're going to connect it to the grid.
Yeah.
And the utility company has to basically approve this connection and figure out how it's going to actually work. And they've got like 500 megawatts of power in New England that is waiting to get connected. That's there, it's ready to go.
Yep.
And it's the utility companies and the structure of how we regulate them that's allowing them to slow walk this. So we need to change that. We need to get different people on the Public Utilities Commission who oversees that are more environmentally friendly and a little less business friendly. Because again, we have just let our whole society be run based on greed and for-profit system, and it's clearly not working, and it's not going to work. The system is going to fail, and we're beginning to see that, and we can fix that, but we've got to act together.
Yes. Yes.
And vote for me September 10th.
Yes, absolutely. No, 100%, because environmentally, but it obviously ties in with corporate greed. It's the disproportionate nature of wealth and how so much has been transferred from the middle class and the working class and everybody to the hands of a very small select few of corporate business people who run these large corporations. So we can try to correct that, like you said, by holding them accountable in legal ways and where evidence is very clear that they violated the law knowingly, get some compensation there, but also work to stop or lessen pollution in the first place moving forward so that the cleanup efforts can be a little bit easier as well.
Exactly.
So definitely.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. So one thing I want to do is create a department of sustainability and regeneration. So that we can really have a department that's focused on what does New Hampshire need to be sustainable and how do we create more regenerative farming and that sort of thing. I like to think about it just as a sort of thought experiment of, like, let's say there was a zombie outbreak in Boston, right? And New England, or New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont had to sort of survive on our own. What do we have enough food, water, and energy? And the fact is, water, we're good. Energy, probably close. Food, definitely not. I would love to see way more money invested into farming. We do not do a lot for our farmers in New Hampshire. A lot of other states do more to help their local dairy production. I mean, my burgers I get from my restaurant from a dairy farm in New Hampshire called Whippoorwill Dairy Farm, and it's just a really hard business, And I think we all learned during the pandemic we want local food sources. It's better, it's more sustainable, and it's cheaper in the long run.
Absolutely, I completely agree. We're gonna together return a lot of autonomy to the people of New Hampshire. More breathing room and economic freedom, more vitality and expression. So just thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it.
No worries. This was fun.
Yeah, this was really fun. We should do it again. And everybody, again, John is running for governor of the state of New Hampshire. The primary is on September 10th. Register to vote or find out how to register to vote. You can go to vote.gov/register/NH. You can also just Google register to vote New Hampshire. John, anything you want to address last for the people?
If you you can show up at the primary and you can vote if you're not registered. You can register day of.
Same day registration.
Same day registration, and you don't have to. You can go in as an independent and vote in the Democratic primary. It's open. So if you're registered Republican, you can't, but everyone else can. And one thing to really understand about the Democratic primary, and this is what I'm trying to exploit, is very few people show up. So your vote will actually count. Why is this?
Vote matters.
Yes, it's because when we vote for president in January, that's like the big primary that people think about. People forget about the Democratic primary, or the primary for governor, because it's September 10th, which is a weird time, so because they're just getting back to school, you just had the summer, so people just do not show up. So last time, there was only 140,000 votes cast for the two people. If the same number of people show up, I only need 50, 60,000 votes. So it's a small number. There's 70,000 registered Democrats in Rockingham County alone. So if all those people showed up and voted for me, I would win. So usually your vote is one of hundreds of thousands, and honestly, you could easily say it doesn't matter. Obviously it does, but you could say, oh, well, I'm one of a million that's voting for president. In this case, in this one case, your vote really, really matters. So, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, your family, get everyone to show up September 10th. Because that's kind of the loophole I'm trying to exploit.
Absolutely. So September 10th is the primary. November 5th will be the general election, where the Democratic candidate will face the Republican candidate. Everybody watching, this is an opportunity for New Hampshire to make some fundamental shifts in its leadership, more focused on the people and really addressing the things that matter to all of us here living in New Hampshire. Check out John. His website is votekiper.org. You can find out all about his policy initiatives, volunteering, contacting the campaign, and more. John, thank you so much.
Thank
I wish you best of luck. I appreciate it.
It's really fun.
All right. Bye, everybody.
See ya.